Good morning. The essay Selected Snobberies, written by Aldous Huxley, is prescribed for the students of BA Part 2 English Literature in Paper 2. So, before we take a look at the essay or its summary or analysis, let us first look at the biography of Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley was born in 1894 and he died in 1963. So essentially, he is a man of the 20th century. Quick facts. His name is Aldous Huxley. He was born on July 26, 1894 at Godalming, England, and he died on November 22nd, 1963, aged 69 at Los Angeles, California. Notable works are Brave New World, After Many a Summer Dies the Swan, Point Counterpoint, The Dose of Perception. Notable family members was his brother, Sir Julian Huxley. Aldous Huxley was the grandson of a prominent biologist Thomas Henry Huxley and was the third child of the biographer and man of letters Leonard Huxley. His brothers included physiologist Andrew Fielding Huxley and biologist Julian Huxley. He was educated at Eton. It's a very famous public school for boys in England, during which time he became partially blind because of keratitis. He retained enough eyesight to read with difficulty, and he graduated from Balliol College, Oxford, in 1916. He published his first book in 1916 and worked on the periodical Athenaeum from 1919 to 1921. Thereafter, he devoted himself largely to his own writing and spent much of his time in Italy until the late 1930s when he settled in California. This is USA. Huxley established himself as a major author with his first two published novels, Chrome Yellow, published in 1921, and Antic Hay, 1923. These are witty and malicious satires on the pretensions of the English literary and intellectual coteries of his day. Those Barren Leaves of 1925 and Point Counterpoint of 1928 are works in a similar vein, meaning with the same theme more or less. Brave New World, published in 1932, marked a turning point in Huxley's career. Like his earlier work, it is a fundamentally satiric novel. It also vividly expresses Huxley's distrust of 20th century trends in both politics and technology. The novel presents a nightmarish vision of a future society in which psychological conditioning forms the basis for a scientifically determined and immutable caste system that, in turn, obliterates the individual and grants all control to the world state. The novel Eyeless in Gaza, 1936, continues to shoot barbs at the emptiness and aimlessness experienced in contemporary society. But it also shows Huxley's growing interest in Hindu philosophy and mysticism as a viable alternative. Many of his subsequent works reflect this preoccupation, notably The Perennial Philosophy of 1946. In the novel After Many a Summer Dies the Swan of 1939, published soon after he moved to California, Huxley turned his attention to American culture. Huxley's most important later works are The Devils of Loudon, 1952, a detailed psychological study of a historical event in which a group of 17th century French nuns were allegedly the victims of demonic possession, and The Doors of Perception, 1954, a book about Huxley's experiences with the hallucinogenic drug mescaline. His last novel, Island of 1962, is a utopian vision of a Pacific Ocean society. The author's lifelong preoccupation with the negative and positive impacts of science and technology on 20th century life, expressed most forcefully in Brave New World, but also in one of his last essays, written for Encyclopedia Britannica's 1963 volume of The Great Ideas Today, about the conquest of space, make him one of the representative writers and intellectuals of that century. Author and screenwriter Aldous Huxley is best known for his 1932 novel Brave New World, a nightmarish vision of the future. So, who was Aldous Huxley? After a serious illness left him partially blind as a youth, Aldous Huxley abandoned his dreams of becoming a scientist to pursue a literary career. In 1916, he graduated with honors from Balliol College at Oxford University and published a collection of poems. 5 years later, he published his debut novel, means his first novel, Chrome Yellow, which brought him his first taste of success. He followed with several more equally successful satirical novels before publishing the work for which he is best known, Brave New World. A dark vision of the future, it is widely regarded as one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. Huxley moved to the United States in 1937 and for the rest of his life maintained a prolific output of novels, non-fiction, screenplays, and essays. Early life of Huxley. Aldous Huxley was born in Godalming, England on July 26, 1894. The fourth child of a family with a deep intellectual history, his grandfather was the noted biologist and naturalist T.H. Huxley, an early proponent of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. His father, Leonard, was a teacher and writer, and his mother, Julia, was a descendant of the English poet Matthew Arnold. In adulthood, Huxley's older brothers, Julian and Andrew, would both become accomplished biologists, and Huxley himself envisioned a future career in science from an early age. But while he was still a boy, Huxley's life would be upended by tragedy. In 1908, his mother died of cancer, and in 1911, he was struck blind by the disease keratitis punctata. Although Huxley did regain some of his sight, he would remain partially blind for the rest of his life and read with great difficulty. As a result, while attending the prestigious prep school Eton, Huxley abandoned his dreams of becoming a scientist and decided to focus on a literary career. Fate struck Huxley one more blow in 1914 when his brother Noel committed suicide after struggling with an extended period of depression. Bourgeoising writer. Bourgeoising means beginning to grow or increase rapidly, means flourishing in other words. A brilliant student despite the obstacles of his youth, Huxley earned a scholarship at Balliol College at Oxford University, where he studied English literature, reading with the aid of a magnifying glass and eye drops that dilated his pupils. He also began to write poetry, and in 1916 he published his first book, a collection of poems titled The Burning Wheel. the same year in which he graduated with honors. Perhaps more important to his literary aspirations, however, was the time during this period that he spent at Garsington Manor, the home of socialite Lady Ottoline Morrell, and a gathering place for intellectuals and writers such as Virginia Woolf, Bertrand Russell, T.S. Eliot, and D.H. Lawrence, with whom Huxley would develop a lasting friendship. With his encyclopedic knowledge, matched only by his wit and skill as a conversationalist, it was at Garsington that Huxley first established his reputation as one of the most significant minds in England. Leveraging this reputation, Huxley contributed articles to such periodicals as Athenaeum, Vanity Fair, and Vogue, and published several more collections of poetry as well. In 1919, he also made advances in his personal life, marrying Maria Nice. She gave birth to their son Matthew the following year. Brave New World. Amidst all of these professional and personal developments, Huxley began work on his novel Chrome Yellow, a parody of the intelligentsia and his experiences at Garsington. Although the book's publication in 1921 angered many of his Garsington acquaintances, it also established Huxley as an important writer and sold well enough to allow him to pursue his literary destiny. While traveling about Europe with his family for the next several years, Huxley produced the commercially successful novels Antic Hay, 1923, Those Barren Leaves, 1925, and Point Counterpoint, 1928, which, like Chrome, were satires of contemporary society and conventional morality. Huxley's greatest work, however, was still to come. Ensconced in his recently purchased villa in the south of France, in late 1931, Huxley began to work on what is now widely considered to be one of the Western canon's most important novels. Published in 1932, Brave New World marks the apogee of Huxley's abilities as a satirist. Means the highest point. Apogee, the highest point. The world it presents, however, is viewed through a much darker lens, informed by the writer's growing anxieties about the direction of political, social, and scientific progress. Brave New World is also an astonishingly prescient novel, foretelling advances in each of these areas that were as much as a half a century away. It is almost as if he could see the future. Set in London in 2540, the 7th century after Ford, Brave New World presents a future in which genetically engineered babies are produced on assembly lines. The social and economic divide between the haves and the have-nots is legally enforced, and discontent is quelled by advertising, medication, sex, and entertainment. Now, nearly a century from the novel's publication, among its prophecies that have come to pass are the rise of dictatorial governments, in vitro fertilization, genetic cloning, virtual reality, antidepressants, and the invention of the helicopter. The novel proved to be a massive critical and commercial success, cementing Huxley's place as one of the most important writers of the era. In the decades that followed, that prestige would enable Huxley to not only indulge his love of travel, but to also explore new ways of being. Novels, essays, screenwriting, and more. Huxley followed Brave New World with the 1936 novel Eyeless in Gaza, which showed his blossoming interest in Eastern philosophy and mysticism. The following year, he left Europe for North America, where he completed a work on pacifism titled Ends and Means, and in 1938 he settled in Los Angeles, California, where he would spend most of the rest of his life. During this time, Huxley added screenwriter to his long list of occupations and was paid handsomely by studios for his work. Among his more notable credits are Pride and Prejudice, 1940, Jane Eyre, 1943, and Madame Curie, 1943 again. All three of these works are classics of literature. These are basically novels converted into films. Settled comfortably in a Hollywood Hills home, in between screenplays, Huxley continued his prolific literary output, completing the novels After Many a Summer Dies the Swan, 1939, Time Must Have a Stop, 1944, and Ape and Essence, 1948, and the non-fiction works The Art of Seeing, 1943, which chronicled a method used to improve his eyesight. The Perennial Philosophy, 1946, and The Devils of Loudon, 1952. He also worked on countless articles and editorials. Much of what time he had left, he devoted to his interest in Eastern mysticism, beginning a decades-long association with the Vedanta Society, whose journal Huxley contributed numerous pieces to. This interest in mysticism also led Huxley to experiment with the hallucinogen mescaline, which he wrote about in his 1954 collection of essays, The Dose of Perception. The title would later be appropriated by Jim Morrison as the name for his legendary rock groups, The Doors. A more utopian vision. In early 1955, Maria, this is his wife, died of cancer, and later that year Huxley published his next novel, The Genius and the Goddess. In 1956, Huxley married his second wife, Laura, who would later write a biography of their life together titled This Timeless Moment, published in 1968. In 1958, he published a collection of essays titled Brave New World Revisited, in which he took stock of the present day and argued that it alarmingly resembled the reality of his 1932 novel. As Huxley tirelessly explored both the world around him and his inner self, sharing his findings through his work, in 1960 he was diagnosed with cancer. For the next 2 years, he persevered, however, completing what would prove to be his last novel, The Island, 1962, which placed a more positive spin on some of the themes Huxley addressed in Brave New World. The death of Huxley. With Laura at his bedside, Huxley died on November 22, 1963, at the age of 69, having written more than 50 books, including one of the most significant of the 20th century, as well as innumerable works of criticism, poetry, and drama. But despite his immense literary stature, his passing went largely unnoticed at the time, occurring as it did on the same day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. This is the President of USA. With this, we end the biography of Aldous Huxley. Thank you and goodbye.